Putin's lies just caught up with him. 2 captured Chinese soldiers have blown the lid off Russia's secret mercenary playbook and exposed the Kremlin's biggest scam yet. They thought they were signing up for money, for opportunity, for a fast track to respect and reward. But everything Putin told them was a lie, from the pay they were promised, to the weapons they were handed, to the war they were told they could win. Now they're sitting in a Ukrainian prison, revealing the truth behind Putin's recruiting machine and the deadly deceptions that got them there. So what exactly did these soldiers expose? And just how far is Russia willing to go to keep its war machine running? Let's take a look. On April 14th, the Kyiv Independent published a report detailing the answers 2 Chinese mercenaries gave during an interview with Ukrainian journalists after they were captured. Those mercenaries are Wang Guangjun and Zhang Ranbo. The men immediately pointed out they were fighting for Russia of their own volition. China hadn't sent them. The country, which is somewhat allied to Russia and has been shipping dual-use components to Putin to build his weapons, hasn't sent anybody. They were mercenaries, Wang said, and it's Wang who revealed the first of Putin's many lies. Russia uses chemical weapons, even though Putin claims it doesn't. Describing his capture, Wang said that Russia targeted him with chemical weapons as soon as it became apparent that Ukraine was about to take him. "I was losing my strength and fainting. Then I felt someone grabbing my collar and pulling me out into the fresh air," Wang told assembled journalists following his capture. Wang says that it was ultimately Ukraine that saved him from his supposed allies. He describes being captured by Ukraine's troops, soon after which he found himself sheltering in a dugout with his captors when the attack happened. Wang describes Russia's soldiers spraying a gas of some description into the dugout, which would likely have claimed Wang's life were it not for his captor. "Ukrainian soldiers protected us and have been treating us well this whole time," claimed the Chinese prisoner of war. Disinformation has been Russia's stock in trade when it comes to chemical weapons usage. Its tactic ever since accusations of the country using chemical warfare has been to deny and deflect, countering all allegations with its own claims. That's according to RAND, which wrote in October 2024 that Russia outright denies the evidence placed before it and will instead claim to be the victim of the very type of chemical warfare it's waging against Ukraine. These denials and deflections began even before Putin invaded Ukraine. Before February 2022, former Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu claimed that US contractors were planning some form of provocation with unknown chemical components. Putin backed those claims, warning that Russia would deliver a military technical response to these supposed provocations. Russia shouldn't even have chemical weapons. It claimed it had destroyed them all in September 2017. However, even those claims were cast under immediate doubt. In its annual report to Congress following Russia's claim of destroying its weapons, the US State Department said it does not believe Russia has declared all of its chemical weapons stockpiles and chemical weapons production facilities and all chemical weapon development facilities. In other words, Russia may have destroyed some of its weapons, but not all of them, and it was still maintaining the facilities it needed to build more. That's been the pattern since it entered Ukraine too. Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov made several false allegations about Ukraine preparing to use chemical weapons, supposedly with military assistance from the US. That claim was dubbed misleading and incorrect by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or OPCW. The OPCW also notes that Kirillov's accusations, along with those made earlier by Putin and Shoigu, were part of a Russian tactic dubbed fake mirroring, reflect the accusation onto the accuser, and it's the accuser who ends up looking like the bad guy. So Putin is lying when he claims Russia doesn't use chemical weapons. Wang felt their full force as he was being captured, suggesting that Russia not only has these weapons, but will use them against its own soldiers to keep them out of Ukrainian hands. Why are these types of weapons such a problem? Not only are they banned under the Geneva Conventions and protocols, but Russia is also a party to the Chemical Weapons Convention, or CWC. This treaty entered into force in 1997 and compelled all of its ratifiers and signees to destroy all of the chemical weapons they had in their stockpiles. So far, 193 states have accepted the CWC and its obligations, leading to 100% of the world's chemical weapons being destroyed. Russia is one of those 193 states. But that doesn't seem to matter to Putin. As the Chinese mercenaries have revealed, he's lying to the CWC and is actively using some form of poison gas in Ukraine. Perhaps that's the biggest lie the Chinese soldiers heard from Russia, but there are plenty more. Take pay as an example. Wang describes how he was recruited into Russia's military during his interview. He was flipping through TikTok one day when he saw an ad telling him to join the Russian military. That ad couldn't have been better timed for somebody like Wang. He just lost his job during the previous summer and was immediately tempted by the offer, not least because any form of military service, be it national or international, is seen as prestigious in China. So Wang met with a recruiter. There he was told he could earn between $2,000 and $3,000 per month if he joined up with the Russian military. Compare that offer to China's minimum wage and you can see why it's so tempting. The highest minimum wage provided among China's 31 provinces is found in Shanghai, where a worker earns about $370 per month. It gets lower from there. The minimum wage declines to just $275 per month across 28 other regions, with the lowest wage on offer being $232 per month, offered in the Guangxi province. On top of a wage that was close to 10 times what he could earn back home, Wang was also told that Russia would cover all of his travel costs and help him to obtain documents he needs to join the country's military. It was all lies. If anything, Russia made it impossible for Wang to access the money he was supposedly making. Putin's forces took away the Chinese mercenaries' phone and bank card. And this was far from the first time that Putin backed out on his promises of high pay to his soldiers. In fact, it's been a Russian pattern since much earlier in the Ukraine invasion. In November 2023, Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty, or RFE-RL, published a report claiming that Russia offered a host of benefits to its contract soldiers, including bonus pay, compensation for injury or death, and the quashing of any criminal convictions levied against the soldier. Russia also claimed it would provide documentation to those contracted forces covering their time in the Russian military, just as Wang was promised. None of it was being delivered. RFE-RL points to an investigation published by Sistema, which claims that relatives of the contract soldiers fighting in Ukraine had yet to receive a sniff of the payouts and pardons due to their family members. It was unclear how widespread the problem was at the time, Sistema claimed, but there was recorded instances of Russia responding very poorly when called on its lies. For instance, one volunteer soldier named Nikolai Troshin spent 5 months fighting for Russia without receiving any of the combat bonuses or leave he was promised. Troshin decided he'd had enough. He exercised his right to leave the Russian military, according to RFE-RL, and that's when the punishment started. Troshin's wife says her husband was placed into a pit, which amounted to a cellar in the ground. There, Troshin stayed without food, water, or medical treatment as a punishment for wanting to leave an army that hadn't followed through on the promises made to him. Wang didn't receive the same punishment. He was captured before he could. However, it's clear that Putin's promises of high pay aren't being backed by money and benefits being sent into the accounts of the soldiers he signs to contracts. Russia is lying to those soldiers. They're tempted in with promises of paydays they could never receive anywhere else, and then left high and dry. Zhang has a slightly different story of how he ended up in Russia. Unlike Wang, he wasn't tempted by a military ad offering thousands of dollars per month. Zhang came from a wealthy family and didn't need the cash. Instead, he decided to go to Russia to take a job in construction. "I wanted to make money," he told journalists after his capture, "but I did not expect to end up in the war." Here we see another layer to Putin's lies. If his promises of massive military salaries aren't enough to tempt foreign nationals into becoming his contracted mercenaries, he simply forces them into his military. In Zhang's case, he was tempted by a job in construction, only to find himself under fire on the Ukraine war's front lines. He's not the only one. On April 7th, the New Arab published a report claiming that Putin is using pressure, coercion, and foreign nationals' collective desires to become naturalized Russian citizens to push them into joining his army. Anybody who wants to claim asylum or become a Russian citizen is being tricked into signing a declaration through which they're pushed into Putin's military. Once bound by those contracts, which affect Arab and other non-Russian individuals, they're immediately deployed on the front lines. There, they become cannon fodder, an expendable source of bodies Putin can use to soak up Ukraine's ammunition. The New Arab says that even those who know what they're signing end up getting screwed over by Putin. It quotes a Syrian tailor under the pseudonym of Armin Khalid as claiming that he was presented with a contract that included a proviso that he agreed to military service in the Russian armed forces in return for his citizenship. Khalid refused to sign, with Russia telling him that his application would take 3 more months to process if he didn't accept the condition. Khalid saw the writing on the wall and withdrew his application. I personally know several people, including a young Egyptian who was working in a restaurant, who volunteered before to go and fight in Ukraine with Wagner, the private military company, and now they're in the Russian army, Khalid tells the New Arab. Those Putin targets are all poor working-class men who thought they'd earn good money and receive Russian citizenship in return for fighting, but instead they've been left facing the harsh reality where their contracts are automatically extended and many won't leave the battlefield alive. The layer of Putin's lies grows deeper. Not only is he using deception and trickery to convince foreign nationals to sign up for Russia's military, but he won't let them leave once they have. Even when their contracts end, he forces extensions on them to send a clear message: you exist to die for my cause. Zhang wasn't one of the poor people Putin targeted with these citizenship contracts. He had money and didn't need to fight for Russia. However, he clearly believed that he would be working for the Russian military as a construction contractor. Instead, he now sits in a Ukrainian prison cell after being pushed out onto the front lines against his will. There were plenty more lies. Both Chinese mercenaries say that Russia claimed to be much stronger than Ukraine in the war. That's one of the reasons both volunteered for some form of military service, even if they didn't expect to wind up on the front lines. Neither expected to even fight a Ukrainian, much less be captured by one. Now that he's a POW, Wang has a message for anybody from his country who's thinking of signing up to Russia's military. For those citizens who want to take part in the war, we want to say that they should not do so, Wang said during his interview. Since everything we heard from the Russians was a lie, it turned out that Russia is not that strong and Ukraine is not that weak. That's why it's better to not participate in wars at all. Perhaps that's the greatest lie Putin told not only his Chinese mercenaries but his own people. He presented Ukraine as a weaker force that Russia should steamroll. On paper, he seemed to be right. Even now, Russia appears to have a much stronger military than Ukraine. According to Global Firepower, or GFP, which ranks 145 military nations annually, Russia comes out on top in almost every department. It certainly has more soldiers in its military, with 1.32 million active personnel compared to Ukraine's 900,000. Russia also has 800,000 more reserves than Ukraine, though how easily Putin can access this supposedly superior manpower is in question, given that he's resorting to hiring foreign mercenaries to strengthen his forces. The disparity was even larger before Putin launched his invasion. For instance, Ukraine only had 298,000 active military personnel in 2020, which was a 4.18% decline from the 311,000 it had in 2019. Russian forces should have blown through Ukraine, but that's not what happened. Elsewhere, Russia appears to have marked advantages over Ukraine. It has almost double the defense budget, though this advantage is being mitigated by the military aid Ukraine receives from its Western partners. In the aerial battle, Russia has 4,292 assets compared to the 324 in Ukraine's air force. This includes 763 more fighter aircraft, over 650 more dedicated attack aircraft, and several thousand more helicopters than Ukraine. Just as in the manpower case, Russia should be able to use this devastating force to overwhelm Ukraine in the air, and it hasn't. Russia is basically non-existent as an aerial threat inside Ukraine, with Putin's tactic being to use his much larger air force to launch missiles and glide bombs from behind the war's front lines. He's doing that because whenever he deploys aircraft in Ukraine, he loses them. The national news says that Russia has already lost around 200 of its fighter jets since Putin started his invasion, which is why so many of them are not being kept in Russian air bases. Again, we see an example of how Russia is supposed to be more powerful than Ukraine on paper, only to be revealed as far weaker. That brings us back to Wang's comments. The reality he ended up facing, as do so many of the soldiers Putin tricks into joining his military, is that Russia isn't what it claims to be. Russia is a paper tiger. At least that's how it appears to be in the context of the Ukraine war. For all the country's supposed military strength, it's experiencing losses at a tremendous rate. Ukraine's Ministry of Finance says that Russia has lost over 10,600 tanks, more than 22,000 armored fighting vehicles, and over 26,000 of its artillery units since Putin invaded. However, those figures pale in comparison to the 935,160 soldiers Russia has lost to death, injury, or capture since February 2022. Wang and Zhang now join those numbers, as do likely thousands of other foreign mercenary fighters to whom Putin lied about everything. Pay, method of deployment, and the very strength of Russia's military are simply not what Putin claims them to be. However, it's not just Putin who's lying during the Ukraine war. China is doing the same. Following the capture of the 2 Chinese mercenaries, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that he had evidence that there were at least 155 Chinese nationals fighting in Russia's military. China claims that there aren't. It labeled Zelensky's comments as irresponsible, while denying that there is a significant number of its citizens fighting in Ukraine. China claims to advise its people to avoid participating in military operations of any party, while adding that it's a staunch supporter of peace in the Ukrainian conflict. The fact that both Wang and Zhang were tempted to head to Russia, the former by an ad on the Chinese social media platform TikTok, shows that China is lying just as much as Putin. The reality is that both Russia and China's claims that Chinese citizens aren't being recruited into Russia's military are false. There's a shadow recruitment campaign going on, fueled by the types of advertisements that enticed Wang. Newsweek highlights this, pointing out that at least 51 Chinese citizens headed to the Contract Military Service Recruitment Center in Moscow between June 23 and May 24. Many more have likely followed since, and Russia is welcoming any mercenaries who come to its offices. Newsweek claims that the oldest of these 51 Chinese citizens was 51 years old. The youngest was just 20. There's only one question left to answer. What comes next for Wang and Zhang? The 2 men who fell for Putin's lies are currently languishing in a Ukrainian prison. If they have their way, they'll never end up in Russia again. Zhang made that clear during his interview where he said, "I understand that there may be punishment, and I am ready for it. but I still want to return home and to my family. It appears the Chinese soldier knows a lengthy stay in prison is in his future. How long that stay ends up being is up to Ukraine. It has a track record of sentencing its Russian POWs to life in prison. However, those types of sentences seem to be reserved for Russian soldiers who killed Ukrainian civilians. Wang and Zhang didn't do that. The pair had only been on the front lines for a matter of days when they were captured. Perhaps Ukraine will be more lenient with its sentences. Time will only tell. For now, the two can only hope to find a route back to the home that Putin tricked them into leaving. Real war is completely different from what we've seen in movies and on TV, concluded Wang. I regret one thing. I want to apologize to my parents, and my only wish is to go back to China and follow all the instructions that will help me to do that. Both mercenaries are now at the mercy of Ukraine's military, but Putin won't care. He also tried to snuff them out with a chemical weapons attack as they were being captured. To Russia's leader, the foreign mercenaries he lies to are nothing more than cannon fodder. More bodies to be fed into the meat grinder he's created in Ukraine. But what do you think about the Chinese mercenaries and their revelations? Does Putin's habit of lying to soldiers to get what he wants surprise you? How long can Russia continue this deception before people thinking about serving as mercenaries wise up and leave Putin high and dry? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more commentary on the latest developments in the Ukraine war. Now go and check out Chinese Soldier Fighting for Russia Exposes Putin's Incompetence, or click this other video instead.